Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. I hope my wellness warriors are having a fabulous morning. Some of you are just getting started. Some of you have been up for a little bit. And whatever the case may be, I hope you're having a fabulous day already. And I hope it's amazing. If you're just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I'm a mom, a nana, a girlfriend, a jazzerciser, line dancer. Basically try to stay fairly active, and a lot of it involves dancing around. Um, I'm also studying for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling, which means there's a lot that I know, and I know enough to be dangerous, but I am not licensed yet. And a lot of what I share here on Wellness Wednesday is personal experience. Sometimes I dig into things at the request of viewers to cover a topic. So I love to learn, and I don't mind doing that because the more I learn, the happier I am, basically. But a lot of what I share here on Wellness Wednesday is my own personal experiences because Wellness Wednesday was kind of designed to be more of a peer thing where we share tips and tricks to help us get through our journeys. So last year I covered a misunderstood mental health conditions episode where it talked about terms that are commonly, basically mental health conditions that are commonly thrown around that may not apply, that we kind of apply more as personality traits instead of actual disorders. And good morning, Bill. And that kind of led to, I had a few people ask me to do a deeper dive into that because it was one episode that covered all of those things, probably the top 5 or 6 mental health disorders that are kind of tossed around as casual terminology. And so this year I decided for Mental Health Awareness Month to do a little bit of a deeper dive. So last week we talked about anxiety and depression. And if you didn't see that, I'll drop the link to that video in the comments so that you can kind of catch up. But today we're going to talk about disordered eating. Again, something that I have a little bit of personal experience with. And I'll tell you right up front if it's something I have personal experience with or if it's something I'm doing research on. But it did come up recently in my class because I'm doing principles of psychopathology. And it kind of was a little bit of a trigger because it made me realize some things from when I was younger. In any case, many times mental health terms are often used casually and out of context, which causes a lot of misunderstanding and adds to the mental health stigma, which is likely to help reduce people actually seeking help when they need it. They're not buzzwords. A lot of these things, they're just not buzzwords. They seem like it nowadays, but it's just not the case. They're real things. And the more we know and the more we can recognize mental health conditions in ourselves and others, and then the more we can act accordingly. And by act accordingly, I don't mean, hey, you have this, you need to go here. I mean, hey, I see you're struggling, how can I help? Or, hey, I might be struggling, maybe I need to talk to someone. So remember, the purpose of these Wellness Wednesday videos is not diagnosis, it's awareness. And that it's about understanding these real conditions as opposed to just labeling anybody that we think fits the loose criteria that we may or may not know about. So just keep that in mind. In the meantime, if you're here, let me know you're here. If you don't see this till afterwards, let me know you saw it. Ask a question, make a comment. Feel free to message me if you have questions. We try to keep everything fairly positive here. And if I don't respond, if you do ask a question or make a comment while I'm on and I don't respond, it's just because sometimes Facebook hides things and I may not have seen it, and I promise I will respond after the fact. So let's talk about disordered eating. There's a lot of misconceptions versus reality out there. I'm just going to highlight a few of them here. One of the myths is that you can tell by looking at someone that they have disordered eating. And that is absolutely a myth and nothing more than a myth. Because the reality is that disordered eating exists in any body type, whether it's thin, average, or extra curvy. The words I originally had here are large, but I have a VIP group that's focused around activewear, and I prefer the term extra curvy. But disordered eating often hides behind what's considered to be normal appearances. Another myth is that only thin people struggle with disordered eating. And absolutely, that is not true either. The reality is that this affects all sizes, all ages, and all genders. Men suffer from disordered eating too. It just a lot of times looks a little bit different. Another myth is that I'm not sick enough, that you need to be sick enough to seek help. The truth of the matter is that even if you don't fit diagnostic criteria, if you have an unhealthy relationship with food and you meet even some of the criteria, seeking help early is better, and the prognosis for healing is better. And then the final myth that I'll highlight is it's that disordered eating is a phase or attention seeking, which is absolutely not true. Disordered eating is often rooted in pain, control, or coping mechanisms in disguise. Because here's the fact is that disordered eating is a lot more than how much food you do or do not eat. It's a lot to do with the mentality that surrounds that, and how you're looking at food and your relationship with food. So if you followed me for any length of time, you know I love my nerd facts. So let's talk nerd for a couple of minutes here. So up to 91% of US women have dieted at some point. Dieting is not disordered eating, just to be clear. But many start as early as age 10, which is a little bit cause for alarm, because age 10, we should not be thinking about I don't want my grandchildren when they're age 10 worried about their weight or what they look like or being judged accordingly. Good morning, Miss Danny. So outside of that 91% of US women, men account for 20% of the anorexia nervosa diagnoses, 30% of the bulimia nervosa diagnoses, 43% of the binge eating disorder diagnoses, and 55 to 77% of other what they call feeding disorder or eating disorder diagnoses. And here's the thing. That is often underreported because, as I said, with men, it looks a little bit different. And men, just in general, with any mental health disorder, are less likely to report. It's been proven over and over again, that whole men have to be strong stigma. Men they tend to manifest things a little bit differently. They present a little bit differently, and they are much less likely to admit if they're having an issue and seek help. So a lot of those numbers for men are seriously underreported. Okay, so a global survey found that 1 in 3 adults felt anxious or depressed because of body image. So remember I said that disordered eating, you don't have to meet all the criteria to need to seek help. 1 in 3 adults feel anxious or depressed because of a body image. That also doesn't mean that 1 in 3 adults have disordered eating. It means that there's a problem here that digs a little bit deeper. Eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric illness due to the medical complications that often come along with them, and also an increased risk of suicide. And body dysmorphic disorder, which is another thing that men commonly experience that is underreported, is not the same as an eating disorder, but is often found to be comorbid in as many as 1/3 of those that are diagnosed with eating disorders. So, and again, body dysmorphic disorder is another one of those where the mentality behind it's just not what you think. It's not what we think when we think of someone that, we tend to think of someone that's too thin or someone that's going to the bathroom and purging. And there's so much more to it than that. So that's what we're here. We're here to talk about that a little bit, educate a little bit about that. Another nerd fact is that individuals in larger bodies, or extra curvy bodies, as I like to say, are less likely to be diagnosed because they're less likely to be taken seriously. And because the criteria at times was a little restrictive and indicated that you needed to be significantly underweight, when in fact a lot of what's behind disordered eating is a mentality, not so much the weight. So individuals who are extra curvy are less likely to be diagnosed or taken seriously, even when their symptoms are exactly the same as a thinner individual. And that's according to the National Eating Disorders Association. And then atypical anorexia nervosa has exactly the same symptoms as regular anorexia nervosa. and the same potentially severe medical complications, but those that experience atypical are usually not underweight. And so again, they experience bias in diagnosis based on the fact that they don't look underweight or they don't look like the type. You see where I'm going with this? And then the last nerd fact that I'll throw out there is that compliments can be dangerous. And I've been guilty of this. Praising someone for weight loss without knowing the cause can sometimes reinforce disordered eating and deepen the cycle. And I'm pretty sure we've all been there at some point thinking someone was pregnant when they were not. I know I can think of actually fairly recently that I looked at someone and said, hey, you look great. You've lost weight. And then I've stopped myself and I've gone, did you do that on purpose? And, oh, goodness gracious. And, you know, sometimes the answer is thanks. I had cancer. You know what I mean? So we can't ever make assumptions based on how someone looks, because it could be something not related to an eating disorder at all. It could be something, completely different, but just as devastating. Or it could be related to an eating disorder. So it's probably better just in general to say, if you want to say that somebody looks great, regardless of the reason you think they look great, maybe, hey, you look great. I haven't seen you in a while. You know, or, hey, you look like you're really feeling healthy. I don't even know if that's right. Even that feels awkward when I say it. It sounded good in my head, but it even feels awkward when I say it. So the point is that compliments can be dangerous. So maybe we should try to compliment someone on the shirt or the dress or the pants they're wearing instead of how they look physically in terms of shape, thinness, or curviness, or whatever. Does that make sense? Because like I said, as that came out of my mouth, I'm like, you know what? That doesn't even sound right. That sounds awkward. So, and that's how easy it is for us to make those mistakes when we think we're being nice and we think we're making somebody feel better and we think we're praising them. But on the receiving end, it might not be anything perceived as anything close to what we intended, and it may reinforce things that are not good. So, what eating disorders can look like? There are several types. The ones that are and it's considered to be on a spectrum now. A lot of things are considered to be on a spectrum now and aren't as black and white, because they're starting to researchers are starting to understand that symptoms are not a one size fits all. Everybody presents a little differently, and it's really whether or not it's a problem is based on how much it's interfering in daily functioning. So a lot of the common types that we're familiar with are anorexia, restrictive or purging type, bulimia, binge eating disorder. Those are kind of your three most common that you hear about the most in the news and the media. And I've been hearing and reading about those since I was little, in teen magazines, and we'll touch on those in just a minute. So what an eating disorder can look like on the outside, and sometimes even then it's hard to see, is chronic dieting. Obsessive calorie counting. And I don't mean logging your food to make sure that you're aware. I believe in logging food into a health app like MyFitnessPal, to be aware. And you guys know I believe in reading ingredients on a label to make sure that we're aware of what we're taking in and that we're not taking in a bunch of processed stuff that we can't pronounce. Good morning, Miss Megan. But I'm talking about obsessive calorie counting, where it's like every minute of every day, and food restriction, watering down of beverages, skipping meals, emotional eating or binging, exercising to earn food. Also guilty of this. There's a couple things here that I'm guilty of. And again, being guilty of one or two of these things does not necessarily mean you suffer from disordered eating. But these are things that it can look like from the outside when it's actually a much deeper rooted problem. So it's exercising to earn food, guilt, stress, and anxiety over food, not wanting to be seen eating, and over concern with body shape or weight, digestive issues, and moodiness. And, you know, we can, in layman's terms, we can perceive moodiness as any number of things. She's menopausal. She or he is bipolar. And that's part of what started this series to begin with, was those casual terms that we throw out. We don't know anything about most of the time, right? So, so when I was 14, actually, it probably started a lot younger. For me, my experiences with disordered eating, I don't know that I would have ever reached the point of meeting the criteria to be diagnosed. But the more I learned as I, in different stages of study for my degrees, and also personal experience, the more I learned about anorexia and bulimia and the mental thought processes that exist behind those, the more I understood that I was dangerously close. So when I was younger, I did have some members of the family that were extremely heavy. And I can remember as a teenager being significantly concerned with whether or not I had family genes that were going to make me, too heavy. I remember being significantly concerned about that as a teenager. But probably the first time I really thought about my weight and how I looked was comments from other people when I was younger. I can remember being like 11 or 12 and out at the lake in a bathing suit and overhearing some guy that was with a group of guys that were looking at me, and hearing the words, "She's still got too much baby fat on her." And for some reason that hit me just wrong. Now understand that these kind of disorders, there's a lot of things that contribute. A lot of it's environmental and a lot of it's culture, our culture and our media. But some of it has to do with being predisposed to think a certain way or perceive things a certain way. And that was probably most certainly the case with me. So at a very young age, and then as you guys know, if you followed me for any length of time, I was picked on, I was bullied a lot when I was a child. In middle school, I was a healthy individual. I helped haul trees out of the woods for firewood for the wintertime. So I was strong. And I was probably a size 6 in middle school, which by no stretch of the imagination, in culture at the time was considered overweight. But I can remember a young man, a classmate who I had a crush on, looking at me when he was coming down the aisle of the classroom and telling me to get out of his way, cow. Or he said, "Get out of my way, you cow." And again, so these little tiny things kind of chipped away up here. So by the time I was a teenager and I was a little more unsupervised living down here in Florida, I went shopping with my grandmother. And I think this was the tipping point for me. And she wouldn't let me buy a size pair of 6 jeans because she said they were too tight and made me go to an 8-10, and a switch flipped up here somewhere and I flipped out. And she had made some kind of a comment where I just reacted really badly to. And so I kind of just stopped eating for a while. I ate very little. Most of my eating restriction occurred when I wasn't around adults, which was a good chunk of the time. And I found myself, even when I did have something like a soda or some orange juice, I would water it down. I would dilute it by half. It would be, so these were the kinds of things that most others didn't see because I was doing them when I was by myself and I was kind of doing them in secret. But those were the beginnings of a problem. Fortunately, it really didn't continue to any kind of great extent. But some of those thought processes did kind of stick over the years for quite some time. In my 20s, after I had my daughter, I was hell-bent to lose the weight. And I was using pills and a couple of other things to get the weight off. And by the time she was 2, I was like 98 pounds. I was 146 when I was pregnant. And most of that weight went on when I actually started eating 3 meals a day because I never ate correctly. I always ate like 1 meal a day and it was usually crap. I didn't know then what I knew now, but I was hell-bent to take this weight off. I was hell-bent to not be fat is the way I looked at it. And at 98 pounds with kind of borderline yellow skin, very pale, dark circles under my eyes, not healthy at all, I still thought I was fat. I would still get dressed and I would still see something different in the mirror than what other people saw. And that is part of the problem behind disordered eating is our perceptions, especially things like body dysmorphia disorder. Our perceptions, what we see in the mirror, are skewed in comparison to what we look like otherwise. When I see pictures now of that time, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I was so skinny and I looked so unhealthy. And it just kind of blows my mind. So obviously that mentality's changed. My mentality surrounding food, and there's some other things that happened when I was a child, and I'll get into that. But my mentality around food has changed, and I still struggle with some things. We're going to talk about those in a minute too, regarding like family patterns and things that we're taught as we're growing up, like being a member of the Clean Plate Club, and not wasting, which is where I find that I struggle with leftovers and I struggle with free food. And we'll get into that in a minute. But my mentality now is more centered around health. Is what I'm eating going to fuel my body for the activity that I want to do? Is what I'm eating, how is it going to make me feel afterwards? Because I don't like to feel over full. Sometimes if I eat the wrong things too many days in a row, then I become what I call the incredible expanding woman. And you can see it and feel it. And it's just yucky. So those things, but I make sure I'm actually eating 4 to 5 meals a day, because I know I have specific nutrients that I need to take in. And my focus isn't as much on what I weigh or what the number is on the scale anymore. It is more about, is what I'm eating going to fuel my activity? How is it going to make me feel afterwards? And that has changed dramatically, but I still have some struggles. So let's talk. So that's a little bit of my story. So what you don't see when it comes to disordered eating, the things that are behind that you don't see. Now, I listed off a bunch of things that you may or may not see in someone else that may or may not be public, and a lot of mine was not public. But what you don't see are the emotional roots. That disordered eating is often related to a need to control, and it usually starts young, need to control or a need to escape something else that's going on. So a lot of the stories that you hear when it comes to disordered eating is maybe someone in the household growing up was critical of that person's weight a lot, or spent a lot of time equating success with how you looked and how you physically appeared. And or sometimes those households were extremely high pressured for success, high pressured for performance. And sometimes people develop this need to control something. And a lot of times food, what they eat, whether or not they get rid of it afterwards, and things like that become the focus of that control. Because a lot of times, especially when you're younger and you're a teenager and things feel out of control, some only things that you can control are like what you're putting in your mouth. Or if you feel like you can't be successful at anything else, if you're successful at losing this weight because you fasted for 3 days, then that gives you a feeling of self-efficacy and control, and success that you're not necessarily getting somewhere else. So a lot of times these have some pretty deep emotional roots that have to do with control or escape. In the case of someone who's stress eating, and I've done that before too. However, that hasn't been my most common thing. We're stressed out. We go to the pantry, we start eating, and the next thing we know, we've wiped out entire bags of things, or entire packages of things, and we don't even remember doing it. So that's kind of a lack of control, and that's where we're using those things as more of an escape instead. A lot of this is rooted in anxiety or trauma. Again, so back to that control thing, perfectionism. Excuse me. Whew, it's that time of year, y'all, sinuses. Confidence, fear of failure. And again, sometimes, especially when you're younger, sometimes it feels like the only thing you can control is food. And a lot of times these things happen in secret. So another thing that you don't see that's behind, and I touched on this a little bit already, is fear of gaining weight. Usually there's a heavy duty fear of gaining weight that's associated with this. Or a lot of feelings of shame surrounding the body, surrounding food, and surrounding eating patterns, which is why, like for me, I had shame about my body, but I had shame about what I was doing. And I didn't want anybody else to see what I was doing because I didn't want them to criticize me. I didn't want them to tell me I was wrong. I wanted to be in control of that. I didn't want to let anybody else in. And that is super, super common when it comes to disordered eating. Also food as a coping mechanism or punishment. A lot of times, we, as I said, either don't have any control or eating, or we decide, depending on how our perception is, that we don't deserve to eat. Maybe we did something wrong growing up in a, I didn't grow up, well, kind of, but if you've grown up in a controlling family and you didn't hit this mark today, or you didn't hit your goals today, then you might decide you don't deserve to eat. And so that's why, and there's some family patterns that some of that comes from, and I'm going to touch on that in just a minute, that you don't deserve to eat, so you skip a meal or 5, because, and again, that's all that guilt and shame and all that pressure, and associating things with food as either a punishment or a reward. And that can be pretty dangerous too, when you start looking at food also as a reward. So sometimes it can be a reward, sometimes it can be a punishment. There's a lot of deep-rooted mental perceptions and beliefs that go along with this, and it's so much more than just not eating. If you see somebody skipping a meal, you can't just assume they have an eating disorder. They may just not be hungry. They may not be feeling well. I don't like to skip meals because I know that if I don't eat every so many hours, then I don't feel good. But sometimes if I feel too full, I'm not putting food in my stomach because I feel too full. And I don't like that feeling. A big one here, and a big one that really came into play as I was growing up, and I know most of you can identify this, is the role of body image and self-worth as it's equated to societal pressure. The first time I learned about anorexia, first time I learned about a lot of things, was from 17, Young Miss, and Teen Magazine, which if I had a child in that time when those things were super popular, I probably would not have allowed my child to read those magazines. And I'm thankful that I didn't have a lot of that kind of thing in the house when my daughter was growing up, because that was before we learned that there were things like Photoshop and ways that they could edit photos so that people on these models, these people in these magazines looked so much different in real life than they did in these magazines. And so we as teenagers, especially if we're picked on or we're bullied on a lot, or we're called ugly, or, we have been given a reason, for whatever reason, to think we're unattractive. We look at these ideal women and how they look, these ideal teenagers, and what is now actually referred to as the thin ideal. We think that's the way we're supposed to be. So when we don't look like that, we sometimes do extreme things. It can have an impact on self-worth. We do extreme things because we think this is the way we're supposed to look. Well, I got a news flash for you. My waist is about this long from my hips to my rib cages. I am never going to have that long, thin waist, no matter how much I work out, no matter what I eat, how I restrict it, none of that. No matter what my food intake looks like, I am never going to look like that because I am built different. And that was something that was just never the focus growing up. And there's some changes now in the media where they're starting to show a lot of different body shapes, which I deeply appreciate. But we still have a long way to go, because when these teenagers, when these young adults, and even us as I'm 51, I open up Facebook, Instagram, whatever, and what I'm still seeing is, most commonly what I'm still seeing is women who fit that ideal, that are barely covered, and that's what we're seeing, and that's what we're comparing ourselves to, and I'm not okay with that. But these are the things that begin to have an impact on us at a very young age, even before the onset of social media. It was a thing. Now it's less paper magazines and more social media. And there is just a tremendous amount of pressure there. So like I said, things are changing in that department. But when you're looking at photos, when you're on Facebook, when you're on Instagram, when you're on TikTok, Snapchat, whatever platform it is you use, see what kinds of things that you're seeing most of the time. Because if you've looked up weight loss, if you've looked up anything like that, new workouts, anything having to do with food or working out or health in general, more than likely you're getting a barrage of images that don't necessarily accurately represent what you should look like. But that's what we're comparing ourselves to all of the time. So there's a huge relationship there between what we see, what the cultural ideal, and again, this is actually called the thin ideal now, and I think it started kind of with Twiggy, For those that don't know who that is, that's a model from, I want to say, in the 50s. It continues today. Although kudos to a lot of companies, again, who are using more different types of shapes. But for men, too, the same issue, except that with men, it looks more like being concerned that they're not muscular enough or built enough, because what are the pictures that we're always seeing of attractive men on social media, in magazines, on TV? These are guys that are muscular. These are guys that are built. So that's kind of how it manifests in men, is they're looking at a completely different example of what they think they should look like and what they think is acceptable, based on this media and societal pressure. So, and then the family patterns. We're going to jump back to the family patterns a little bit. Body or weight related criticism going up. Again, success equivalated to, it's not the right word. I make up my own words sometimes. Success that's equated to how you look, how you appear, how you dress, all of those things. Those emphasize an outer image versus an internal image. And so we begin to equate our self-worth with how we appear. That if we're not dressed just the right way, or we can't dress just the right way, or we don't look just so, that we're not professional, that we're not a good person, that we're not, these things start to get attached to our personality characteristics. And that's how we look at ourselves, and sometimes how we look at other people too. So it's huge. And then another family pattern is, again, food as punishment or reward. There's often an overemphasis, and I just had this conversation with my daughter the other day, because I feel like I didn't start learning about food until my daughter was a teenager. So I was still learning a lot by myself, but we were past a point where anything I really said was going to have an impact on her at that point in time, I think. But I find myself doing it now when talking about my grandchildren and referring to good and bad food. And that's not really the ideal way to refer to it, because when you have an overemphasis of good versus bad foods, or you're referring to foods as cheat foods, then sometimes that results in children as young as the age of 8, teenagers, even adults, who, when they consume bad food, they binge on it, and they do it in secret. Because they don't want to be caught, because they think they're going to be in trouble, because now consuming this bad food makes them feel like they are a bad person. So there's a lot of equations that go on there that we don't think about. And again, punishment or reward. Sometimes that looks like, hey, if you're good, we'll go get ice cream. Well, there are other kind of rewards that are probably more ideal. I don't know about so much in this age, but in my age growing up, if you got in trouble, you went to bed without dinner. And that's using food as a punishment. And then there's, of course, growing up, there was this big emphasis on being a member of the Clean Plate Club, which is where I talked about that I still struggle, because if we go out to eat especially, and I also grew up in the era where we had all the Ethiopian video footage on TV all the time about the starving children. And our parents would be like, eat your dinner, because there's starving children in Ethiopia that would love to have what you have. So there was a lot of guilt associated with eating, just in that respect alone. For anybody that grew up with a TV on in their house while they were eating, there was a lot of guilt associated with eating. You felt guilty if you did eat your food. You felt guilty if you didn't eat your food. And a lot of times there's just a lot, y'all. I feel like I've said the word food a lot, and I probably have, but it's because there's a lot equated with food. We do a lot of social things surrounding food. We have meetings surrounding food. And everything is somehow associated with it in a good way or a bad way. So those kinds of family patterns, like I said, right now I struggle. If we go out to eat, it takes a lot for me to stop when I'm full and say, I need a box to take this home. It took me a long time to figure out I could take it home and eat it as a leftover. I could still have a clean plate and not clean it all in that one day, because I would eat to excess to the point where I was uncomfortable, because I didn't want to not clean my plate, because I didn't want to waste food. So when there's free food offered, I feel like I have to take advantage of it, and I don't want to waste it. And I sometimes go a little overboard. So these are triggers. And I actually have a friend who actually lost a lot of weight on purpose, on purpose using the Noom app, and I don't know a lot about the Noom app, so I'm not endorsing it per se, but it sounds like if you have triggers like the ones I'm talking about where you like can't stop eating because you're stuffed but your plate's not empty yet, things like that. Noom actually doesn't just deal with weight loss tips and tricks and guidance. It also deals with some of that mindset issue that sometimes comes behind the reason that we can't, that we struggle to find a healthy relationship with food. Because I want to make sure you understand we're not just focused on weight here. We're focused on having a healthy relationship with food and viewing it as something that can be enjoyed, but is primarily for the purposes of fueling our body. In good ways or bad, and we need to figure out what are the good ways and what are the bad ways, and then have the negative ways kind of in moderation. So, as I said, those are the things that you don't see that surround eating disorders or disordered eating, and unhealthy relationships with food. So to start wrapping up, why does this language matter? Why does language matter? Because again, let me remind you, especially if you came in late and didn't hear the beginning, this is about recognizing that the language we use casually can sometimes lend to the stigma. So the language matters because unhealthy patterns don't start with malicious intent. They don't, these kinds of patterns that take root, they don't start with, they just don't start with malicious intent. They don't start with a parent intending to shame you thin. And they don't start with a person just determined to purge everything they've just eaten, because they want to. There are other reasons, deep-rooted reasons behind it. And these don't start with malicious intent, but they often start with unawareness. Just like the comments we make to other people when we say things like, hey, you look really good, you've lost a lot of weight. We don't intend anything negative. We think we're being positive. But again, there's that example of how things tend to be culturally rooted around how we look and how we appear. So unhealthy patterns don't start with malicious intent, but they start with unawareness, and we can break those. It just takes a long time. It took us a long time to get here, right? So these are real. The reason that language matters is that these are real diagnosable mental health conditions. And so when we throw around random things, and I'm going to tell you a quick story. I know this is running a little bit long, but we kind of knew that these deeper dives would run a little bit long anyway. These are real diagnosable mental health conditions. And when we throw around things like, oh, well, she's skinny, so she's anorexic, in casual conversation, it does a lot of damage. Not to mention that sometimes it makes us look pretty stupid. I'm just saying. So these are real diagnosable mental health conditions, and we need to be careful not to apply these conditions or the names of them as personality traits to random people. Misusing terms and assumptions, again, why language matters. Misusing terms and assumptions trivializes the experience of the person actually struggling, and it dilutes the reality of what they're experiencing. And when we're diluting what they're experiencing and they're thinking, oh, it's no big deal, or hey, I'm not as bad as that person, they're less likely to seek the help that they might really, really need. So that's where these casual conversations can be damaging. And again, not because we're doing it with malicious intent most of the time, but I have a story for you. So not everyone, and the last thing I'll remind you of in terms of language is not everyone who is extra thin or curvy or extra curvy has an eating disorder. I have a friend who for quite some time was actually, I grew up with a handful of friends who just, you know those, the ones that no matter what they ate, they never gained weight. Everybody made fun of them because they were super skinny. And in this case, I had a friend who was walking across a parking lot several years ago, super thin, was trying to put on weight, could not put on weight. So obviously that's not a mental thing. That's a biological thing, right? And someone passed them in the parking lot, rolled down the window and said, why don't you go eat a cheeseburger? And I was horrified. I still start to get teary when I think about it because it's so horrifying. Because there could have been any one of 500 reasons why that person was as thin as they were. And only one of them might have been an eating disorder. But no matter what those reasons were, they could have been anything. It could have just been biological that person couldn't gain weight. And that happens. There are some There are some people that just don't start putting on weight or filling out, if you will, until they're in their late 20s, early 30s. There are some people who have eating disorders. There are some people who have other illnesses, autoimmune diseases, cancer, various other reasons why they might appear less than that ideal weight. To say something like that can be extremely damaging on numerous levels, no matter what the reason is that they are that thin. And I've seen similar things said, about heavy people. When they're ordering a Diet Coke with their McDonald's. There's a lot of really the comments that we just don't think about, that we toss out casually, that could actually do a lot of damage to the recipient or the person that they're about, because we make too many assumptions based on the fact that someone doesn't look like that ideal that we have had drilled into our heads for years. So that's why language matters, and that's why it's important to know a little bit more, and to know that these slang terms that we throw around, or these mental health disorders that we throw around as casual language, can actually be very damaging, and they can actually really keep people from seeking the help they need, and it can help to build and maintain that stigma that we have. So I'm going to wrap this up now. I know this one was long, and I apologize, but whenever there's personal stories involved, it's always longer. So a few reminders and a call to action for you. Have you ever felt stuck in an unhealthy relationship with food or with your body? If you have, and you're willing to sharing your story is a big deal. It may help someone else. Then share the tools that you use that helped you in the comments. If you're not there yet, but you want to talk about it, you can feel free to message me. But even if there's a little tiny part of your story that you can share, that's the theme of NAMI's Mental Health Awareness Month, is share your story, because sharing our stories, just like we're doing here on Wellness Wednesday, helps to empower others to take a step, to get help, to try something new that might help, whatever the case may be. So if you've ever felt stuck in an unhealthy relationship with food or with your body, not necessarily mutually exclusive, then if you're willing to share the tools that helped, awareness and compassion, not just for others, but for ourselves too, are the first steps in correcting these types of thought processes that lead to disordered eating. And it's okay to seek support. And if you're not sure and you're like, like I mentioned earlier, if you don't think you're sick enough, if you have some of these things and you're like, I may need to talk to somebody, I know this is a problem for me, or this hit a button for me, you can still seek help from a support group or from a therapist, or from a primary care physician if you think there's something that needs to be addressed. That's up to you. I can't tell you whether or not it's something that needs to be addressed, but if there's something here that hit a nerve with you, then maybe it's worth having a conversation with some type of practitioner. And then finally, remember that you are not alone. Whatever it is, healing is possible, depending on the different kinds of conditions, or just even if it's temporary things that you're experiencing. Just know that you are not alone. There's so many options out there. Reach out, reach out to NAMI, reach out to local support groups, reach out to church groups that offer counseling. There's a lot of options out there. Even if you're not sure about insurance or ability to pay, there's a lot of great options out there if you need help for anything, not just disordered eating. So just remember that you are not alone. You are never alone. I know that it's hard to believe that when you're in the throes of it, but it's true. So that is all I have for today. If you found this helpful or think someone else will, please share. And next week, our third part of this little mini series is going to touch on PTSD. I thought the timing was appropriate since Memorial Day is coming. And I know the differences between who we honor on Memorial Day and Veterans Day. But it's still, a lot of times PTSD is associated with those who have served. So it's still appropriate timing. So we'll touch on that a little bit, do a little bit deeper dive into that. And I hope you're finding this helpful. In the meantime, I hope you have a fabulous week. I'll see you next Wednesday, and be well.